So, we are now on page 89, looking at part 2 of the punctuation lesson. So, the kind of punctuation we will look at is called a comma. A comma is used to separate things. Separate ideas, words in a series, information from the subject, many different ways to separate. And there's 4 kinds, actually, of commas. They are listed in the book. You have a listing comma, a bracketing comma, a phrasing comma, and a joining comma. We will look at each of these kinds of commas with this lesson. So let's begin on page 89 with the listing comma. A listing comma is used to separate ideas in a series. To use algebra, you could have X, Y, and Z. The X, the Y, and the Z are anything in English. Can be emotions. Happy, sad, and angry. Can be places in Thailand. Bangkok, Phuket, and Shanghai. Anything can be separated by listing commas. So if you look in the book, we have some examples. The Thai language is spoken in Thailand, in parts of Laos and China, and by Thai people living abroad. 3 ideas. In Thailand, parts of Laos and China, and Thai people living abroad, outside of Thailand. Look at the next sentence. You can fly to New York cheapest by going through Moscow, Athens, or Tokyo. Moscow, Athens, or Tokyo. So this is called a conjunction. And it's used between the second to last and the last. Now some people ask me, do you have to have 3 parts of the sentence? 3 X, Y, Z for a listing comma? You can have more than 3. You can have 4, 5, 6, but you must have a comma between every part and end with a conjunction before the last part. Now in British English, they often do not use this comma between the second to last and the last. But I'm teaching American English, and we always use a comma there. So if you're wondering, why is there sometimes a comma between the second to last and the last? It's because British and American English have different rules. Okay, so let's look at the top of page 90 and look at some of the other example sentences. Tommy speaks French, Brandon speaks Italian, and I speak Spanish. We have 3 complete sentences, X, Y, and Z, that are all separated by commas. If you're wondering about the rest of this information, I went ahead and wrote all the other commas, so it'll be easy for me to point to later on in the lesson. So, the last sentence, we spend our days filling out forms, entering data into the computer, buying new machine parts, and recording all the money spent. We now have 4 parts. You have the X, Y, and Z. Have extra sentences, extra parts to the sentence. And we also, of course, have the conjunction. So if you did the exercises on page 90, I hope that was all clear to you. You also have the information about an adjective separated by a listing comma that support a noun. Let's look at those examples. This is an exciting, interesting book. Exciting, interesting book. Separated by a comma. Both words describe the book. Her long, dark hair is so beautiful. Long, dark hair. They can be separated by a listing comma. Or, as the lesson shows in the book, you can use the word and to connect them. Both are good English. And Americans like to use both styles. Using the word and or using a listing comma to separate adjectives describing the same noun. So please do the exercises for listing comma. Let's move on now to a joining comma. A joining comma separates two complete sentences. For my example, sentence 1, a complete sentence, subject and verb, and then you have sentence 2, separated by a joining comma and a conjunction. Now the rule in English is that you only use a joining comma with a coordinating conjunction. The coordinating conjunctions are listed on the bottom of page 90 going to the top of page 91. They are and, or, but, for, nor, and so. But not all Americans know this rule. They learn it at high school, but they often forget. I often say that people learning English as a second language often know the rules better than somebody who is a native speaker. It's good if you know this rule, that only a coordinating conjunction is used with a joining comma. But you'll often see mistakes. Native speakers using conjunctions other than and, or, but, for, nor, yet, so. And you'll find that they don't know this rule correctly. But I recommend you learn it and use it well. So let's look at the examples. Russia has applied to join the European Union, and Turkey is expected to do the same. We have Russia wanting to join the European Union, sentence 1, and Turkey wants to join the European Union. 2 subjects, 2 verbs, 2 complete sentences, separated by a coordinating conjunction, so we use a joining comma. Look at example 2. You must hand in your homework by Friday or you will receive a 0. 2 subjects, you for sentence 1 and you for sentence 2. 2 verbs, must hand in for sentence 1 and for sentence 2, will receive. We have the conjunction or, so you must have a joining comma. The next sentence, Robert is working on an important project, so he isn't available to meet right now. He's busy. So Robert is busy. He's working on another project. So we add another conjunction. So he is too busy to meet. He isn't available right now. And the last sentence, billions of dollars have been spent on new projects. Billions of dollars have been spent. Yet, we have nothing to show for these expenses. So a lot of money has been spent, yet nothing is finished. There's nothing to show. So 2 sentences joined by a conjunction, a coordinating conjunction, and a joining comma is used. Later on in the lesson on page 91, I talk about how there's other conjunctions you use and you don't use a joining comma. I also show mistakes. I hope that's clear information to you. Go ahead and do the examples, the practice questions on page 92, and look at the answers in the back of the book. So let's move on to the third kind of comma, the bracketing comma. A bracketing comma is used to separate information that is not important. Not important. You can take it away. It usually comes between the subject and the verb, but not always. It can appear anywhere. It can come anywhere in the sentence. You just use two bracketing commas. Bracketing commas come together to separate that information. Look at these examples. These findings, we think, cast doubt upon the sales department's report. So the "we think" is not very important information. You can take it away and the sentence still has the same meaning. When you hear it, it's still clear what the sentence means. Example 2. Landon Foods, of course, is the largest food distributor in the world. Well, Landon Food is not a real company. I just made it up. And the information, of course, can be taken away. You separate it with bracketing commas. It's not important. Our boss has, it would seem, left for Tokyo this week and didn't tell anyone. It would seem can be taken away. It's somebody's opinion. It's not very important information. And finally, this proposal, published last year, will change the way we make our products. This can be taken away. Published last year. It's only extra information about the proposal. It doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. Top of page 93. Ron Brooks, who was fired from the company last month, now works with our main competitor. Who was fired from the company last month is extra information about Ron Brooks. He was fired from the company. That is interesting information, but is not super important. You can take it away, and the sentence still has the same meaning. The final example, we have to conclude, after careful study of the issue, that buying TC Auto is not a good idea. So it's giving extra information after careful study of the issue. That's interesting, but not super important. You can take it away. So, on page 93, I show you what the sentences sound like without the extra information. As you can see, they're still good English and still have the same clear meaning. So please do the exercises 1 to 5 on page 93 about bracketing commas and check your answers. The final kind of comma is called phrasing. And a phrasing comma is used to separate information at the beginning of the sentence from the subject and verb, the rest, the remainder of the sentence. So look at some examples on page 94. There are several examples. I'll read all of them for you. In 2008, our company introduced a new MP3 player that is now more popular than the iPod. So the information in 2008 is not super important and comes before the subject. So a phrasing comma is similar to a bracketing comma, but it's always at the beginning before the subject and usually begins with a preposition or an adjective. And it should be short information. And then you use the phrasing comma to separate it from the subject. The next sentence, by bowing his head, my father honored the Buddha at the temple. He bowed his head. It's giving information about my father, his action. And it's information before the subject. So for the example, I'm using X to be the information before, and here is the phrasing comma. The next one, feeling a bit sick, Ted laid down in his office and fell asleep. So this is an adjective phrase describing Ted. Ted is the subject. He was feeling a bit sick. Then the verb is he laid down and fell asleep. So you must have a comma, a phrasing comma, to separate the adjective phrase from the subject Ted. It's not super important information. It comes before the subject and the verb. It must be separated. Having no money for a taxi, Sarah had to take the bus back to her apartment. So she had no money. This is an adjective phrase describing Sarah. So again, you separate with a phrasing comma. At the party, my supervisor gave a Christmas present to everyone. Gave a present to everyone. Where did he do that? At the party. So it's a prepositional phrase, begins with the preposition at, and is separated by a phrasing comma. I hope you're understanding now that short information at the beginning of a sentence before the subject must have a phrasing comma. Having worked for years in China, Susan speaks excellent Chinese. So, you use that information at the beginning, having worked for years in China, and you then separate it. Second to last, if there are any further cuts in funding, our department will be severely affected. So, if more cuts in funding, less money is given to our department, we're going to have a problem. We will be affected. We will be affected. And the last sentence, although South American wines are fairly new, they already have a great reputation. So there's a lot of information in that sentence before the subject. Talking about South American wines are fairly new. And then the subject, they. You may wonder, why isn't the subject South American wines? Well, South American wines is part of an adverb phrase that comes before the real subject, which is they. That might be confusing, but the they is the subject. And the South American wines, which is what this pronoun is talking about, come in an adverb phrase that must be separated by a phrasing comma. So there's a lot of information you could learn here about prepositional phrases, adjective phrases, adverb phrases. And I recommend you learn that information, but it's not necessary to understand this idea. The idea is that information before the subject needs to be separated by a comma. Things that tell about where, when, how, why. Talking about which one. This information is an adverb, adjective, or prepositional phrase that must be separated by a phrasing comma. So please try the sample examples and questions on page 94. The answers are in the back of the book. If you have any questions, please feel free to write our staff about this information. Any question you may have about listing, joining, bracketing, or phrasing, we're always here to help. I think listing is probably the easiest. Joining's pretty simple too. Just make sure you remember the coordinating conjunctions. And remember that not everybody knows that rule. So you will often see joining commas used incorrectly with conjunctions that are not and, or, but, or, nor, or so. The bracketing comma is pretty easy too, but can be difficult. You have to ask, what is the important information? Can I take this information away and the sentence still has the same meaning? It's often used for just added things like of course or it seems like this or adjective information like the report published last year. Just added information you separate with bracket and commas. And the final one, phrasing, can be difficult if you don't know how to find the subject. You must find the subject and think about the information before. Is it information describing that subject? In 2008, traveling to Thailand, my father boarded the plane in Chicago. So where was he going? He's going to Thailand. What's my father doing? He's getting on the plane. So the information before must have a phrasing comma separating it from the subject. So please, study this chapter again about commas. Look too about ending punctuation. You'll see in this lesson, every sentence ends with either a period, question mark, or exclamation mark. That's true for every sentence. So I hope you found this lesson about punctuation very interesting. We're always here to answer questions. My name's Alex Linville, and this has been Lesson 25 from the American Way.